You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Barris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Welcome to another awesome episode of Beyond Wellness Radio. In today's show, we are talking about brain health. We have a great interview coming up for you. But before we dive into the show, let me tell you about our newsletter. If you go to beyondwellnessradio.com, you can sign up for the newsletter. There's bright in orange a newsletter sign-up feed. Signing up to the newsletter will give you the quickest access to all of our information. We send you a newsletter every time a new episode comes up. Also, there are links to mine and Dr. Justin's websites. If you go up to the top, there's a link for Justin Health, and that's where you can contact Dr. Justin directly and work with him virtually. You can also go to my site, reallyhealthynow.com, and to get more information and work with me virtually. We work in our independent locations, but we work with people all across the globe. So technology makes that possible, and it's super awesome that we can do that. And for one more thing, make sure you guys go to iTunes and leave a review. You guys can also send us any questions that you guys have straight through beyondwellnessradio.com /questions. So with that being said, how's it going today, Dr. Justin?
Barris, it's going great. I'm actually really excited for this interview and going over some of the really key points in neurological health and how we can use it to help repair from injuries, recover from injuries, and just perform better at our daily lives.
Yeah, definitely. So we do have Dr. Andrew Hill on the phone call today. How's it going?
Great, gentlemen. Justin and Barris, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Doing very well. So so you have like this giant bio, and I don't want to mess it up. Like you're doing some awesome. You're the lead neuroscientist at the company TrueBrain, but you also you received your PhD in cognitive neuroscience from UCLA, and you also teach courses there, right? Like to just give everybody a brief
sure,
quick, exactly.
So I'm a sort of a peak brain health guy, and I operate in that space across many different sort of activities. As you mentioned, I'm the lead neuroscientist for TrueBrain. TrueBrain has developed a couple products that blend different nutraceuticals, nootropics, brain health promoting supplements together. Mm-hmm. And I've helped them architect their blends as well as doing research on the products we develop to sort of see what effects we can validate. And that's more of the sort of consumer product, if you will. I also teach at UCLA, courses on psychology, neuroscience, gerontology. And then I run the Alternatives Brain Institute. I'm the director of neurocognitive services in Beverly Hills. And that's a peak brain training center that does lots of things, but broadly speaking, it helps you get the best brain you can get. And that might mean helping you train away the ADHD or the depression or the anxiety or whatever else is going on in your brain. So we sort of do individualized, evidence-based brain training where we assess what challenges you're experiencing and then help you resolve them using sort of high-tech biofeedback and mindfulness, high and low-tech sort of approaches at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the high and low tech at the same time. I don't know if the listeners noticed like how giddy I was because I was rushing through traffic to get back home, but also I was so excited to get on this interview. Like I was like missing my words. I was So right as you were speaking, I took a deep breath in just to relax real quick. Like okay, I know you're excited to talk about all this brain geekery stuff. But yeah, just like you mentioned, there are some low tech techniques too, but there's also the really high-end stuff that you can do to kind of get yourself to that place a lot quicker, right?
Yeah, certainly. Using biofeedback or specifically neurofeedback, which is simply biofeedback done on the central nervous system, you can make very rapid changes to stress level, attention level, sleep regulation, all kinds of things. Now, many of these same changes can be achieved using meditation or mindfulness as a practice over many weeks or months. But the biofeedback process is very rapid. Within a handful of training sessions, people experience shifts, and you can produce, improvements in attention, sleep, stress level very quickly within literally a few sessions of training often.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
That's very cool. And Andrew, this is Dr. Justin here talking as well. And again, just pre-interview, everyone, we just found out Dr. Andrew and I went to UMass, fellow alum together. So that was kind of something that was very, very much in common. That kind of shocked me a little bit.
That's right. Neither one of us sounds like we have that Massachusetts accent, so we both escaped it.
Yep, exactly. It comes out from time to time, but no doubt. And one thing that was really, let's say, I'm on your sites right now. I'm looking at some different things that you're doing, and I was actually doing some research because I live in Austin and I have a clinic here in Austin as well. And I was looking for various biofeedback and EEG devices, and I'm friendly with Dave Asprey, and he's a big fan of this program called 40 Years of Zen. I think Dr. Hart puts it on. It's called Alpha Brain as well. And it sounds like some of the biofeedback that you're doing is in the same realm. Are you familiar with the 40 Years of Zen?
I know the program. I believe Dave Asprey flogs the neurooptimal system, which is actually my least favorite of any possible option out there. It's the most expensive and it's the most proprietary. So I tend to think that, in the field of biofeedback on the brain, neurofeedback,
right.
Technology is proliferating dramatically. And when I got involved in the field about 15 years ago, it cost at least $10,000 to get set up, and you were doing individual, 1 or 2 channels on the scalp of training.
Right.
And nowadays there are, both lower cost systems, so you can get into it for much less expense, but there's also sort of the other end, where there's this elaboration of technology where you can buy incredibly complicated high-end systems, supposedly, but no one really knows that they work any better than the simple 1 or 2 channel EEG trainings we were doing. And so there's this rush to sort of complexity in the field that I think is a little bit unnecessary. One thing that we do here at Alternatives, and that I do a lot for the research for TrueBrain, is what's called a QEEG, a quantitative EEG. And that's what, Justin or Barris, you guys sat down and wanted a brain map. I would have you sit with your eyes closed for several minutes and then your eyes open for several minutes. And I would take that sort of resting baseline data and compare it to a normative database that has thousands of brains in it. And out of that, we would get a statistical sort of map about how your brain differs from typical or average in a whole bunch of different ways. And then based on what statistical sort of unusual patterns showed up, we would start narrowing down, what physiology was driving things you care about, disrupted sleep or stress level or inability to sustain attention or whatever it is you would want to focus on improving, will show up as a statistically unusual, if you will, pattern in these brain maps. And that does a few things. It keeps the biofeedback process evidence-based. We're training based on your brain, not based on some sort of arbitrary heuristic or clinical lore. And that's one thing that I think is very critical is keeping it evidence-based, always going back to the literature, always going back to what brain patterns the person is demonstrating, and making your decision about what needs to be changed based on that. Now, the literature has not yet caught up with biofeedback all that well. I mean, we can do all kinds of things to the brain in the clinic that are powerful and profound. There's only a few things that have been well validated in the research literature for biofeedback. One is ADHD, one is seizures, one is migraines. These things all appear to be very tractable. In fact, for things like attention management or ADHD, when it's bad, it looks like for the most part you can eliminate symptoms in 20 to 30 training sessions in most people, above 90% of people. And the effects you get are largely permanent. So you can take this, somebody hyperactive or really distractible or has a really hard time sustaining attention as they get tired in the afternoon, and sort of fine-tune the resources, build more strength, build more attending, if you will, add some inhibitory tone. And very quickly, within a few weeks, you can take somebody who is dramatically dysregulated in attention and help them, get more control over which mode they sit in, a sustained attention mode or a focused mode. And the literature is very robust now for attention management. There's been plenty of double-blind, placebo-controlled studies done. In 2012, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which releases sort of state of the treatment reports every couple of years. They moved biofeedback up to what they call level 1 best support in 2012 for ADHD. And the only other thing at that level is psychostimulants, Ritalins and Adderalls and things. So they now consider neurofeedback or biofeedback a frontline intervention, if you will. And for other things, the literature is very, very intriguing about what it can do to the brain. And this is not simply cognitive health. A colleague of mine in Torrance, California, Gary Schumer, published a paper last year on some research he did about 20 years ago looking at HIV positive individuals, and showed that doing some relaxation work in biofeedback could raise the T cells, the CD4 plus cells,
right,
back up to typical levels, average levels. And these were, HIV positive men with fairly profoundly impaired T cell counts. And this was sort of before the antiretrovirals had hit the market. So these were guys who were coming in essentially living under a death sentence, 20 years ago. And right. Many of them, the statistics are fairly beautiful in the paper. And there's a published article now showing that with this alpha training, relaxation training, you can really bring the T cell counts back up. And so it works for all kinds of things: attention management, sleep management, immune status, PTSD, OCD, major depression, anxiety. These are all, from my perspective, viewed a little bit as sort of regulatory issues. I don't think of ADHD as a problem with, an illness or a disease. I think it is a tuning problem, and some of this is informed by my perspective as a neuroscientist, as an educator. I tend to teach psychology and neuroscience from the perspective that everything that we have going on between our ears is largely evolutionarily valid. Like, there's a reason that we develop these things. Evolution's very costly, and developing certain resources or abilities, it was usually done because of the pressures in the environment, not because it was just some random thing. And attention in that metaphor, we needed people who could sit and weed and really pay attention to the small plants in front of them. And we also needed people who could scan the environment and notice the tiger or notice the small, red berry that was hard to spot. So we need people, or we evolved, I believe, to develop sort of human brains that have abilities to sustain attention, as well as ability to sort of scan the environment and notice everything that's novel or everything that's, dangerous or interesting. Nowadays, in a modern, if you will, society, we only really reward the type of brain that can sustain their attention in sort of the cubicle mode, as it were.
Right.
And we don't reward the person who can process everything in sight and gets pulled off by every interesting idea or interesting thing in the environment. But it's not a very dramatic different brain, ultimately speaking. Even the most distractible person in the world has moments where they can sit and sustain. So you're not unable to sustain. In fact, I would argue that strictly speaking, ADHD, the deficit of attention, is not really a deficit in the amount of attention. It's sort of a truism that the average ADHD teenager can sit and play video games all day long.
Right. So it depends
and that's
on what.
attending. That's sustained attention. It's highly stimulating and they're very motivated. But you have a kid who can sit there and play video games for 7 hours straight. It's a little hard to conceptualize that as a deficit of attention, of resources. It's more about control of those resources. So a lot of what we're doing is giving you more control about which mode you sit in. Oh, it's important to stay attended now in this classroom, or to not interrupt my colleague in this business meeting.
Right.
And so we add a little more sort of, control, inhibitory tone, and that mostly gives people just a little more ability to direct their, mind, their thoughts, their attention.
And on that note, you mentioned certain biofeedback devices or EEG devices out there. Some are overpriced, some aren't. Which one, in your opinion, would be like, one of the best units that you could buy as like a layperson or maybe even a professional to get the benefit?
So for a home consumer or a power user, this stuff isn't trivial to use, but it's also not, it's not rocket surgery. It's you can stick wires to heads and measure brain waves. That's not the hard part. Knowing what to train, what frequencies you want more of or less of, and where in the head you want to train is actually not trivial. And I do recommend folks that want to home train to sort of take an approach where they, find a professional, get a brain map, a QEEG, to get a starting place, figure out what brain you're really working with, and get some candidate protocols from that, clinician. And then in terms of low cost, there's really only one game in town for low cost hardware that actually works. I mean, there's many, many more things out there recently that are being flooding the market. All these forehead dry sensors, all these headbands and things. Right. And unfortunately, none of those things actually work in my experience. The dry electrodes with forehead sensors, the forehead's the wrong place to measure almost always for biofeedback. And two, they're very low quality signals in these very cheap sensors. So there's a company out of Australia, oddly enough, called Pocket Neurobics, Neurobics.
Pocket Neurobics.
Pocket Neurobics, yeah. And it's a small, wonderful little company that makes interesting devices, interesting EEG devices. And
so pocketneurobics.com for everyone listening.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
And he actually sells kits and call these build your own BYO kits. And he sells 2-channel EEG devices, 4-channel EEG devices, HEG, which is infrared blood training, blood flow dynamics and things. But I think he has a device currently called the U-Wiz, which is his lowest cost device. Add some electrodes, add a copy of BioExplorer, which is the software to process this stuff. And you can probably get yourself up and running for, I don't know, like $1,300, $1,400.
That's great.
Is about where it starts to come in. And this is all PC-based software too. So you need a decent PC, not a Mac, unfortunately.
Got it. And I know Barris is itching to ask some questions. I just want to get your take on, I'm a patient, right? I'm coming in. Let's say I have anxiety or ADHD. How does this work? So I sit down in a chair. What's your role as the doctor? What's my role? How does this work?
Yeah, you could almost think of me as sort of like a coach or a personal trainer, but I'm a personal trainer in a realm where nobody may have ever seen the muscles you're trying to work on, or the training gear you're working on has to be completely built anew for every person's specific, gains they want to make. So let's say you can walk in and you say, a very common cluster, if you will, of symptoms is I get too anxious, I got some ADHD or distractibility, and I'm not sleeping great. Those three things are often come together. And I would say, okay, great. Let's before you tell me too much about yourself, I don't want to get biased when I look at your brain. So before we even really talk, let's do an assessment. And I would sit you down, do a QEEG, develop these maps, these patterns of activity that are statistically unusual. And then we'll sit down and I'll say, okay, look, this pattern here can mean hyperactivity or impulsivity. Is that true for you? Do you have that experience? This one here can mean hypervigilance. This one here can mean a reactive mind. This one here can mean some experience of rumination. This one here looks like sleep onset issues. This one here looks like sleep maintenance issues. And we sort of figure out of the 9 or 10 patterns that show up, which ones are valid from your perspective, subjectively.
Right.
And usually, the reason I don't do a large clinical history before talking about the results with a client is because I don't want to be biased. And it's also kind of impressive to sort of do a cold read on their brain.
Right.
And describe them mostly accurately. Of the 9 or 10 things that I'll find, usually they're almost all something the client goes, yeah, how'd you know? And so once we figure out the big outliers in their brain statistically, what they really want to be working on, what their goals are, then folks come in sometime between twice a week and 5 times a week. So let's say you came in, Justin, sit down and say, hey, how are things been? How's your sleep, your stress level, your attention? Okay, great. Put a couple of clips on your ears, put 1 electrode on your head, maybe 2, and then you'll sit and watch a video game. And whenever your brain is sort of trending in the right direction, the game will run. And whenever your brain is trending in the wrong direction, the game stops running. And what I mean by trending is we're making all these different brain waves, things called alpha, beta, delta, gamma, theta. But we're not making them as some static amount. We're not making X amount of theta all of the time. We are making all of our brain waves all of the time. People sometimes don't know this when I start explaining the brainwave, the EEG landscape. Delta we're making a lot of when we're deeply asleep and not dreaming. Slow wave sleep is delta. But you're still making other waves even when you're deeply asleep. And when you're awake, you're making all of the waves in various amounts moment to moment. And so simply you sort of set up a measurement threshold, and when the things you want to drop drift down, you make the game a Pac-Man eats dots or a spaceship, flies through the sky or something happens. And whenever your brain naturally and normally drifts in the wrong direction, let's say, your slow brain waves, your theta goes up, I make the Pac-Man stop. And the next moment it drifts down and the Pac-Man starts eating dots again. And then it goes up and the Pac-Man stops. And over half an hour of training, the session length, you might have a few hundred of those events of stopping and starting rewards or things happening on the screen or audio events. And after a few sessions, usually 3, 4, 5 sessions in, you start experiencing some subjective shift. It's very subtle. We aren't zapping the brain. We're simply applauding or withholding our applaud, if you will,
right.
Applause for changes in the right direction. And after several sessions, the brain is starting to go, hey, wait a minute, I want input. So I'm going to start making, more of this brainwave and less of this brainwave because that makes the game run a little more smoothly. And we start getting different experiences. As your theta drops, you get more crisply attentive. As your, midline beta drops, you sleep better. As your posterior eyes closed beta drops, you are less anxious, less hypervigilant. And so we just kind of, figure out a game plan based on what we see in your brain maps and what your experience is of having a brain. And then from there, we just slowly iterate and fine tune. And, it's like going to the gym or a physical therapist. Most of my clients do about 30 sessions to start. And that's, between about 6 and, maybe 16 weeks for the whole training session. And many clients at that point have made enough change in their brain that they're done. Especially for things like attention, sleep, anxiety, the changes are largely permanent, where you make a change and the brain is now always sort of practicing its new mode. So there's no real need to go back and train more for many people. If there's an active disease process, schizophrenia, HIV positive status, something that's keeping things sort of awry, Alzheimer's, you might make really good changes in someone's experience, but stopping training will often cause sort of, a wearing off of the effect. But for things where it's not an active disease process, anxiety, ADHD, major depression, I would even call a tuning issue versus a major disease. All of these things seem to resolve pretty, reliably. I would say the range of sessions is probably between 30 and 100 across the various types of things we work with. And you really can, for the most part, eliminate ADHD, moderate anxiety, sleep issues, or anything else that is sort of a moderate regulatory feature just by training a few times a week for a couple of months. So, in terms of clinical and making massive, tailored, specific interventions that one person needs, that's what we do is the biofeedback. And then, of course, I also do a lot of alternative therapies and train folks to meditate and help them instantiate meditation and mindfulness practices, which also build brain health pretty dramatically in some folks. So,
yeah, that seems pretty awesome, especially the fact that, like we mentioned when we started, that these neurofeedback sessions can help get you to a certain point quicker. You mentioned meditation and mindfulness can help, and probably after these sessions, like if someone came in and might have, like for myself, if I have mild ADHD and I come in there, I might say, you know what, I have a difficulty time trying to meditate, right? And you could probably help me get there a lot quicker. And then now I can have that practice, and that can, like you mentioned, the 30 sessions sometimes for someone with ADHD, something like that. Maybe now for maintenance, all they need to do is have that mindfulness practice. Yeah. Exactly.
For ADHD, I would say 20 to 30 is about average. And in that time, you can usually eliminate all or most of the ADHD in a way that is largely permanent. Across, all presenting complaints, I would say you're talking between 20 and sessions, and then some things with an active disease process or active sort of, more dysregulated brains, you might require more ongoing training. But for the most part, it's sort of an intervention that gets you back on track, and you do for a limited amount of time. It's not like therapy or, anything else where you're doing it for a very, very long time. So it's kind of odd. I work with clients for, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then they go on and, live with their new brains, and I often don't see them again unless I pull them back in for assessments, after the fact, which I do sometimes. But
yeah, definitely. Oh, because one of the things that I've always thought as soon as I started to get into the health when I was younger, when I started getting into the health field, I noticed that they were always classified as disorders, not necessarily diseases. And so it always made me think like, well, we should be able to change these, and there should be certain things. And of course, now we have the technology to do a lot of powerful things. And you mentioned a home device. What are some, because I know right now, currently what usually happens with people is we give them a type of molecule, chemical to change their behavior, a psycho stimulant. But are there any that you think are safe, or are there any exchanges that maybe if someone has more mild? I know you work with True Brain, and of course it's a supplement that I bet you would recommend. But what are some of the I guess it's a loaded question. Here's two questions at the same time. But are there some safe drugs out there, and maybe certain people need them? And if not, or if so, what are they, and what can they replace them with?
I don't think that most of the drugs used for attention management, and they're almost all psychostimulants of some sort, I don't believe that any of them are safe. Because they mostly, I don't believe that ADHD is dramatic. I mean, again, I'm not a medical doctor or a psychologist. I'm a neuroscientist. So my perspective may not be, necessarily the same as everyone else's. But I don't believe that it's a disorder. I don't believe it needs to be medicated, ADHD per se, except in the most extreme cases, where it's getting dramatically in the way of life. But beyond that, I think that you can do a lot with scaffolding, with building in sort of accommodations in life, task lists and calendars and things like that. I also think that teaching people a 20-minute-a-day meditation practice will actually do more to support their attention long-term than psychostimulants will do. And those effects start showing up within a few weeks. Now, getting an ADHD kid to start meditating is, a hard ask sometimes. And so getting over that initial hump of, not knowing how to do it or not sure you're doing it properly is a very big deal. But I would say that I don't really think that there's a lot of good drugs out there that support attention, just like there's no drugs out there that make you go to sleep. All the sleeping meds are hypnotics. They sort of put you in this weird sedated state. And then if you're tired, ideally your brain takes over with a sleep reflex and you go to sleep. But there's no drug out there, as far as I know, still, that actually causes sleep. It just kind of drugs you up until you then, fall asleep.
And if you fall asleep, you actually never get into those deeper REM, stage 3, stage 4 sleep where you're really repairing and healing the body.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and we discovered, there was a study out last year that the brain is sort of washing itself with cerebrospinal fluid, and all the sort of metabolic end products and toxins and things are being removed from the brain through this washing, like a car wash at night. And that only really happens later on in the second half of sleep. You need to sort of be in that deep, slow wave sleep for that to really happen.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember, I think it was Dr. Kurt Parsley, I think his name is.
Parsley,
I remember he mentioned something very similar, saying, you would never, see someone in a UFC fight get knocked out and say, oh, he's asleep. You'd be like, no, he's knocked out. And it's the same thing with the drugs. You don't say, oh, that person's asleep. It's like, no, they're just unconscious.
Yes, they're sedated, exactly. And to some extent, if you flip the metaphor, the same is true for drugs that are attention drugs, quote unquote. They're not really improving your control of attention. They're just ramping the gain up, so you have more sort of pressured attention. You're attending more. But you don't necessarily have more control, and it's not necessarily without consequence. The psychostimulant class of drugs, almost all have fairly significant side effects. They suppress your appetite. They're habit forming. If you abuse them, and a lot of teenagers and college students are abusing psychostimulants now, high levels of psychostimulant abuse produces psychosis in some people.
And a lot of these medications too, aren't they just methamphetamines? Your Strattera, your Adderall?
Yeah, well, the methylphenidate, like Strattera and Ritalin, are not methamphetamine. They're another molecule. But Adderall has a molecule that's very similar to methamphetamine, just in very low dose. And so, these are doing all kinds of crazy things to the brain. They're mostly given to kids and adolescents. And at least some of the drugs out there in this class seem to change developmental trajectories, make your brain grow less or less quickly.
Right.
And many countries, the U.S. Doesn't have this anymore, but many countries, a lot of the psychostimulants carry what's called a black box warning. Canada and the U.K., for instance, because kids suddenly fall over dead on psychostimulants. Their heart, they have cardiac side effects, and they have a heart attack, or their heart just stops working. And so, there's lots of side effects, and anyone who's tried a psychostimulant, they don't feel like you. I mean, you feel altered on them. You're pushed. And that's exactly the thing we're trying to get rid of in ADHD, is the feeling of being pushed, being out of control. So I don't think that the psychostimulant class is very useful unless you are somebody who has massive, sleep-wake issues, and then you're probably better off with things that aren't stimulants, things like modafinils and, other narcolepsy drugs.
Right.
And by the way, just for the record, I hate Provigil. I hate modafinil.
Okay.
It's used a lot in self-hacking, biohacking circles as a nootropic. And I would argue it's not a nootropic because it has side effects. It's not a nootropic because it has very, very mild support for cognition. And the side effects are non-trivial. I personally got the side effects you get from modafinil. Ended up in the hospital for a while with head-to-toe hives and my skin threatening to peel off, my lungs threatening to close up. And this was taking it as prescribed once a day for 2 weeks. At the end of that time, I basically had a systemic histamine, storm that caused major, major life-threatening issues. And, not that common to have side effects on modafinil, but they happen. And therefore, if you're in this space of nootropics, which means, cognitive supporting compounds, drugs, supplements, whatever, the threshold for cost benefit should be very high. You should only entertain the risk of side effects in drugs if you're trying to fix a problem. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to just help yourself be more attentive, sleep better, more stressed, more learning, whatever it is, then you shouldn't tolerate any side effects. The risks are just not there for small incremental improvements long term. And so I really encourage folks to think of this definition of nootropics or brain compounds. One of the very important parts of that definition is not having any side effects or having very, very low or manageable side effects. And psychostimulants don't fall into that category. Neither does modafinil, neither does caffeine.
Right.
I'm a big fan of coffee. I think there's lots of things in coffee that really, really help the brain.
Oh, yeah.
I'm somebody who wakes up in the morning with too much blood in my caffeine stream.
And on that note, with the coffee, have you tried the bulletproof coffee where you're adding the MCT and the butter in there?
Sure. I tend to add grass-fed butter and coconut oil, a little bit of coconut oil.
Oh, great.
I don't think there's any need for refined MCT. I think coconut oil is a fine version. I don't use his beans, his bulletproof beans. I'm not a big fan of them flavor-wise. And I also think that the mycotoxin reason for his beans is somewhat a manufactured issue. I don't think it's a real issue in this country.
Interesting.
And so I'm more about finding, small batch, single origin,
right.
Where I know where it's coming from, where it's a small number of steps between the grower and my cup than going through a big chain.
Hopefully organic without the pesticides.
Exactly.
Those are going to hurt your nervous system.
So I have small roasters in LA that I work with, or I have a couple up in Portland that I, know personally that send me coffee every so often. And so I just make sure that my coffee is high quality. I'm not concerned about toxins and things. But yeah, I drink way more coffee than is probably all that healthy. But I keep a nootropic compound on hand to take the edge off the caffeine. Some of your listeners may know of a compound called L-theanine,
GABA,
which is a naturally occurring amino acid found in tea leaves. And if you're a tea drinker, you've experienced this interesting combination of both calm and focus at the same time. And that's a combination of caffeine and L-theanine, or the caffeine pushing up adenosine for the alertness. And the L-theanine pushing up the GABA for calming.
Right.
And so I keep some L-theanine, at hand in a bottle. So when I overdo it and get up above a gram of caffeine that day, I can sort of, down-regulate. But we also put L-theanine in the True Brain blend for the same reason, to sort of buffer the over-arousal effects you get when you're seeking high-performance states sometimes.
I'm looking at the ingredients for that right now, and you have some really good things in there. Now, my experience is I've used piracetam. I do it with my coffee, MCT, and butter in the morning sometimes, about 800 milligrams. I've gotten good experience with that. I've used aniracetam, which is fat soluble. And
Yep,
I noticed
very
you
similar.
have oxiracetam, and I haven't heard too much of that. Can you talk about these racetams?
Yeah.
Are they an essential nutrient, and what's your take on it in
Well,
general?
they're not essential nutrient. That sort of means the body needs it but can't manufacture it. And these aren't really needed by the body per se. But the racetam class in general, which was first synthesized, I think, in the early 60s or late 50s, were synthesized from GABA. So GABA, the neurotransmitter, is the only universally calming or inhibitory neurotransmitter. All the rest sort of are excitatory, inhibitory, depending on which circuit they're in specifically. But GABA is always inhibitory, always making cells less likely to fire. Right. And GABA has this sort of very characteristic structural ring called a pyrrolidine ring. And all of the racetams have this ring structure kept intact. And so initially they were synthesized from the natural compound, if you will, GABA. Nowadays, of course, they're just synthesized. And piracetam was the first one. It's the best studied. It has the longest history, the best safety. And so that's really why we picked it for the TrueBrain 1.0.
Right.
Aniracetam I experimented with. I mean, actually, all the TrueBrain ingredients were sort of a personal experimentation path for many, many years before Chris Thompson and I came together to create TrueBrain, the company. And then, now there's 20 or 30 people sort of always working, everything from supply chain through research on new blends. But way back when, I was just doing a lot of self-experimentation and giving stuff to friends and family. And aniracetam I tried, and aniracetam has a very short window of effect, like 90 minutes or less. And it's also more anxiolytic, more calming than most of the racetams. And for me, it was too calming. It made me feel almost blue, almost like I had no energy. So because it didn't act very long, because it was sort of a little bit anxiolytic, too anxiolytic.
Right.
We for piracetam initially. And then oxiracetam is a very similar compound in terms of effects to piracetam. They're probably the two racetams that are the most similar. And the biggest difference is that oxiracetam tastes sweet, while piracetam tastes like battery acid.
Got it.
And so when we instantiated TrueBrain as a drink, as a liquid format, which we call Think Drinks, these little 1 ounce tear-off packets, the first iteration of the Think Drinks were piracetam based and have a sort of, energy drink flavor, this sort of bitter, weird, chemically flavor. And I was also drawing a hard line. I did not want us to include artificial sweeteners. I didn't want us to include too much sugar. And those are hard things to do with horrible tasting things. And we managed to make an okay flavor, even with piracetam. And then in the TrueBrain formulations, we always have a sort of a day format and then a boost or a turbo. It's a little bit different for those extra long or extra weekend days or something where you need a little extra boost. And we made the boost flavor in the drinks oxiracetam based, and the flavor was actually good. It actually tastes fairly palatable. And so we're switching over time, over the next few weeks, all of the drinks, all the Think Drink formats are going to be oxiracetam based because the flavor is just so much better. It's also a bit more soluble. I think oxy is one of those ones that's both fat and water soluble. Aniracetam's fat soluble and piracetam is water soluble. So I think oxy gets us both of those.
Now, regarding the oxiracetam, I don't think there are many research studies like you mentioned as piracetam. What's your take on that? And do you feel like if it was studied as much as piracetam, you'd have the same kind of results?
I think you would, because subjectively it's very, very similar, and the molecule is very similar too. Some of the racetams are a little bit unusual in configuration, and the effects are very different. The best example is probably levetiracetam, which has a brand name Keppra, and it's actually an anticonvulsant, a seizure drug. And it does not feel like taking piracetam or oxy or anti or pramiracetam or anything else. Those are all gently supporting of attention. We think there's an acetylcholine, because of how it makes you feel checked in and visual, sort of attending. But Keppra or levetiracetam makes you sort of sedated. It's doing what a seizure drug does. It's trying to make the brain less likely to fire. So similar molecules, same derivation, but very different effects. So we're in the nootropic space operating in all these supporting compounds where we think it's going to improve your cognition, your memory, your attention, your learning. But we still don't 100% know. And, one of the things that TrueBrain is trying to do that's a little bit different, I think, from most, supplement or nutraceutical companies is we're trying to, we can't be a big pharma. We can't drop $10 million on a, clinical trial. That's just not the space we're in. We don't have the money. We're still a startup, 2 years in. It's still, a little lean. We don't have vast amounts of money to do huge amounts of research. But what we can do is say, look, everything we're putting in these blends has decades of safety and efficacy in the literature. So we're making good choices for you, sort of the curation play, if you will. And then secondarily, we can actually do novel research on this blend of compounds and sort of look at the actual brain effects that are being supported by TrueBrain. And that's the place where we're really sort of putting a stake in the ground to try to determine what the brain effects are of many of these nootropics.
You think that that using something like a TrueBrain, while and of course this would be something that you would have to test and be really safe in doing so, but doing something like when we talk about the EEG in the testing your brain and training it, could you think that this would enhance it by using
I do
like
actually.
Yeah,
paracetam certainly. I mean, other things in TrueBrain also have sort of neurotransmitter effects. The tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine, which is a learning and salient signal. The choline in TrueBrain is a precursor for acetylcholine, involved with memory and attention. Paracetam appears to work broadly and help cells be a little more sort of flexible, and their mitochondria work better for more energy. But in general, it looks like it helps things work more, paracetam per se. A lot of the work we have done with testing the blend, testing TrueBrain, is looking at EEG effects of people's brains on versus off TrueBrain. And I've done this, both with a little population of convenience, some interns. We brought in, last year, we brought in 25 stock traders from New York City and did a double-blind, placebo-controlled version of on-task activity. They were doing trading simulators. And I've also done several case studies on individual people who, took TrueBrain or did a baseline brain map and then took TrueBrain for a few weeks and then a baseline again. And in all cases, I'm seeing the same EEG changes. There's increase of fast alpha, which is sort of a flow state rhythm, and as well as low beta, which is sort of visual attention and concentration and memory and things, in the parietal and temporal lobes. So the areas involved with visualization and memory and directing your attention are all slightly enhanced, we think. It's exciting to be doing this research with TrueBrain. It's really why I'm working with the company, because they do have this science-first focus, unlike any other supplement company that I've heard about. But it is still early on, in spite of some of these compounds having decades and decades of literature on their safety and their efficacy. No big company has spent billions or millions determining how magnesium works in the brain per se.
Right.
Because they can't make money on patenting magnesium, so they don't. I do feel that we're adding some value to the space, and our existing user base of TrueBrain subscribers, they're getting the benefit of this stuff because we do iterate, we do make subtle changes, we improve ingredients. So the folks that have been with us for the past 2 years have slowly been getting a better and better nootropic blend or stack as they continue to engage with our sort of cutting edge blend.
That makes sense. And I was actually surprised to not see in there, I wanted to get your take on this, is the compound PQQ, because I know that's one of those mitochondrial enhancing, even mitochondrial repairing compounds. What's your take on PQQ?
My take is it's too new to know much about. And then you have to understand with TrueBrain specifically, we had to really balance what we're putting in it with efficacy and dosages. I mean, we couldn't put a gram of every high-end compound in there because it would either be a double handful of 50 pills you wouldn't want to swallow or too expensive. And so the way most supplement companies finesse this is they put tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of buzzword-compliant ingredients in the blend, and then they hide the amounts behind a word that says proprietary blend.
I know.
I was very anti. I mean, that's in the supplement world. That's called fairy dusting, like Tinkerbell flying by and dusting your product.
Yes.
And I made sure that was not our approach. We worked really hard to sort of be anti snake oil, and that's a very snake oily thing to do.
Yeah, because oftentimes you're taking in a bunch of like rice flour.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or little tiny amounts, but without knowing how much it is, you think you're getting what's useful amounts of stuff.
It's not
therapeutic.
Right.
It's not therapeutic. And TrueBrain, capsule format definitely, and certainly the liquids too, had to decide, well, what are the ingredients and how much of each. And I only have 7 or 8 ingredients in the product because of that. Because to get enough of the racetams, enough magnesium, tyrosine, theanine, carnitine, and other things, we had to only have a handful of ingredients. That was very much a strategic decision not to make every single interesting compound be part of our blend just because it was in the news or just because one biohacker had been flogging it more aggressively than another.
And looking at it here, I mean, I understand a lot of the nutrients there. We have carnitine, which is bringing fat to the mitochondria. We have theanine that's upregulating GABA. What are the main, just to put it in layman's terms so everyone gets it, like with the TrueBrain, this product here we're talking about, what's the main mechanism? Is it more neurotransmitter? Is it more mitochondrial? What's happening?
It's a mix. It's a mix. One of the things you'll find if you dig into the nootropic space, all these self-hackers, there's a lot of fairly broad variability in how people seem to respond to the racetams. And so I did a lot of head scratching and digging into the research and tried to figure out why that might be. And the sort of heavy lifters, if you will, in TrueBrain are really the racetam, piracetam or oxiracetam, and the choline source, which is either CDP choline or alpha GPC. And that's the 1-2 punch of a good nootropic stack to start for most people. But then everything else is modifiers, if you will, to sort of make those work better or to sort of support other ancillary issues in attending. And I'll just run through them. Tyrosine helps bring up dopamine, so you feel like you're more attending. CDP choline not only helps build acetylcholine, but helps the cell membrane build phosphatidylcholine. So it's really helping the membrane health.
Right.
Piracetam makes cell membranes much more fluid and flexible, so signaling goes up. Both magnesium and theanine are there to buffer the high end, the over-arousal that you might get when you're slamming down too much caffeine and you're stressed out because you're have one too many balls in the air. The carnitine, again, for mitochondrial fuel, as you said. And then DHA in the capsules, fish oil initially was the product, DHA. Now we're using an algae form, so it's a vegan-friendly form of DHA.
Right.
That's just omega-3 fatty acids. And, we cut out the middleman or the middle fish in this case, and we're getting DHA from algae. I mean, even when you get it from fish oil, fish get it from krill, and krill get it from algae. So you're just eating sort of 3 steps up the food chain when you're getting DHA from fish. To avoid the mercury and also the environmental impact of fishing and the issues we have with deep seawater fatty fishes these days, we decided for many reasons to go after an algae form in the product. So it's only 8 things in the capsules and 7 in the liquids because we didn't include the omega-3s in the liquid for shelf stability reasons. But we think that if you had to pick a starting place to get into this space, and you do any research at all, and you realize, okay, there's all kinds of strange strings of letters and numbers and research chemicals and lots of conflicting information out there, and not everything's safe, and not everything is truly a nootropic. There's a lot of drugs and other weird compounds out there. This is a good starting place was really our goal. So,
and looking at this, if you're going to combine it in with diet, so we have supplements. Supplements aren't replacements; they aren't there to replace a great diet and lifestyle. So let's say we have this, and we have a good diet on board. What does that good diet look like? Is there good amounts of fat in there?
Yes.
Proteins. Can you go over how that looks on a practical standpoint?
I would say the broad strokes are decrease or eliminate sugars in your diet, especially starches and grains are among the worst things you can do as a human.
Totally agree.
I would say no grains, no starches, and no fruit sugars. Maybe only get your starches from vegetable formats. It's a safe way to get starches that are coming from veggies. And I don't mean potatoes and corn. I mean, vegetables. But otherwise, it's about getting enough fat.
Right.
high quality fats and enough omega-3 fats and minimize your omega-6 fats. And beyond that, you're fine. I mean, you're going to get enough protein if you're eating sufficient fat. But I would say fat is the essential nutrient. If you don't eat carbohydrates, you have no problem. Your body adjusts to it. If you don't eat fats, you die.
Right. And it sounds like your approach, Dr. Andrew, is you're really going more to a ketogenic type of approach. Is that correct?
Sort of. I would call it sort of, it's primal or paleo or keto. Right. But I don't think you actually need to be in ketogenesis to reap all the benefits. I just think you need to avoid spiking your blood sugar. Yeah. And so I tell folks when they ask for specific numbers, okay, don't have any more than 20 grams of carbohydrates at any one sitting, and keep your overall carbohydrates to about 75 grams a day. And if you're an athlete, to about 100 or a little more a day. But basically, don't spike your blood sugar ever, and that keeps the insulin system sensitive and signaling. And then you don't really have to worry about all of the inflammation issues, all the oxidation issues, all of the insulinogenic problems that come. I mean, a lot of the diseases of aging are insulinogenic, cancer, diabetes. These things can all be sort of managed by managing high quality fats and keeping sugars out of your system. And this is true of not even the big ones like cancer and diabetes, but there's at least some evidence that Alzheimer's is mediated by blood sugar issues in the brain, by a type 3 diabetes, if you will.
Yes.
And so, it's really, really critical to, in my opinion, avoid spiking your blood sugar and get enough high quality fuel sources. And that really means fat. And I would say, if you're concerned about the quality of your fats and there's too much to think about in doing this kind of diet, then simply draw a hard line on carbohydrates. And in the absence of any excess sugar, even low-quality fats won't do that much damage. You could probably be eating highly saturated fats, nothing but bacon all day long. And if you had no sugar coming in, I don't think you would cause any issues with heart or anything else, or even cholesterol. I think it's really the sugar that in the 70s, we vilified fat. Everything became, low-fat diets from that point. And if you plot the low-fat diet incidence in this country and the incidence of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and other problems like that, the curves overlap perfectly just about. So it was essentially a poor marketing message that got into public minds by a couple of poor doctors in the 70s and 80s, and we've been paying for it ever since. I mean, I think the cost on Western health has been in the billions because we've been avoiding fat. And I think we made the wrong, it was the wrong choice. It was the wrong villain to paint. And we should have really pointed at sugar as the culprit. And now we're just starting to correct that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the next 10, 20 years we see a big drop in the metabolic syndrome that Westerners tend to have. So.
Yeah, definitely. So we went over some of the training modalities, some of the chemical substances you can use, such as the True Brain that you guys offer, and there's some other things, the diet. I know that one thing that we talked about before was possible recovering from different disorders, but what about brain injury? So, for example, I play college football.
Yeah.
I get hit in the head way too often.
Yeah.
It's probably not making me any better.
It's not. Yeah, it's not good for you. I'm
pretty sure just if I grabbed a computer and shook it around, it probably wouldn't fix things. Things are probably going to go wrong. You have people that go in there and receive benefits. Could you rewire it? Could you fix the problems that are caused by some of these?
Yeah, I have worked with traumatic head injuries before, closed head injuries and things. You can make changes with biofeedback, neurofeedback. Absolutely. It's a longer road. It's not 20 sessions and you're done. It's more like 60, 100, 120. And you're working on the individual things like the fatigue that shows up in the afternoon and some of the, maybe if there's frontal damage and the executive function stuff. It's a little bit more of a slog through sort of dysregulated tissue, and you have to work a little harder, more sessions, longer. But yes, you absolutely can make pretty big changes in brains that have received some injury. But just for you, let me give you some advice here. In terms of concussions or getting your bell rung when playing sports, getting a concussion, a mild concussion, or having a mild injury like that, it's not the worst thing in the world. the first time.
Yeah.
The danger comes from the next one. You really need, because this is this sort of inflammatory cascade in the brain, and everything gets sort of, inflamed and swollen, and the damage that can then be caused is greater. And so I forget what the number of weeks is, but I think it's like 4 or 5 weeks after a concussion. That's the danger window. It's at least 3 weeks long. So really, after getting even a mild concussion, you should not expose yourself to risk of impact for another few weeks.
It's funny because the concussion protocol, really, if you have a concussion, that they often do in sports, especially football, because I've had teammates that have concussions, and you're supposed to sit out for at least 1 week. But then, of course, next week you're totally fine.
Right.
And so that's the scary thing.
But your brain is still swollen.
Exactly.
And that hit you get in practice 2 weeks later, that doesn't feel like a concussion, just did more damage than the concussion did that you received.
Yeah, it's almost like
this is long-term major damage. If you're a sports person, if you're a football guy receiving hits, twice a week for many years, you are going to be impaired in 20 years significantly, and you're probably going to have some very, very major drawbacks.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really I think that's a really important thing that I want to just highlight that there, Doc. I think that we're seeing a silent epidemic with a lot of these contact sports with football, and I want you to comment on this in a sec, that, people out there, league officials, are saying, hey, it's not a big deal, but these guys, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, they're hitting each other harder, and we have to remember, people listening, about half of your brain are immune cells, these microglial cells. And when you get turned on, it's very hard to turn them off. So I want you to touch upon the microglial, the immune cells, and also about the epidemic of these athletes in the head injuries. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, certainly it's true. It's real. There is an epidemic of teen athletes who then end up sort of impaired in college, and professional athletes who end up impaired in later life. I would say the NFL is very aware of this. Yes, coaches have been saying, not a big deal, not a big deal. But for the past few years, there have been studies showing that, okay, actually it's a big deal. The NFL has, business incentives to not recognize it as a big deal.
Absolutely.
And in fact, there's this organization that sort of helps players sue for money when they've been injured. And I believe there's a football player whose name escapes me who actually is an advisor to a brand new neurofeedback company that does some really nice technology. And he was giving a talk at the big neurofeedback conference called ISNR this last fall, and he said, "Okay, look, in the NFL, when a player sues, the NFL organization just delays. They have a strategy of delaying for years until the person dies. Because these guys with head injuries die young. Die at 45 and 50 and 60, not 80. And so there's been a strategy in-house of simply delaying those legal battles until the person dies. I would argue that the NFL is being forced to face the massive epidemic of head injuries. And this is being discussed at high school sports levels too. They're talking about maybe making college a touch or flag sport at the high school level or even college level. So I think that we're becoming more and more aware of what's happening with repetitive head injury like that. But I don't think it's yet, like you said, fully gotten into the acceptance, because if a person gets a concussion playing football, they should sit out for a few weeks, and that's not happening, right? So,
and also the conventional response is, oh, put on some sunglasses and sit in the dark, where it's like, hey, maybe we can do some high dose nutrients to help attenuate the inflammation. Maybe we can add in some curcumin or some turmeric or some fish oil.
Yeah, very possibly. Very possibly. I mean, of course, we're now in the medical space, but there's lots of things that are anti-inflammatory. There's lots of things that can be done. And I think in general, when you talk about the brain, when you're trying to deal with an issue, you need to, be aware of the idea that the more interventions you bring in, generally the faster changes happen. So there should be a diet intervention and a neurofeedback intervention and anti-inflammatories and maybe specific drugs to shut down the inflammatory cytokines in post-concussion states. many things are often useful to bring to bear, not simply, monotherapies when talking about the brain.
Mm-hmm, definitely. It's funny because if an athlete were to break their leg, you want to just be like, oh, okay, you're about good, run on it, and then jump on it again, and all of a sudden, and then second time comes around, it's much worse, or it's very sensitive. But because we can't directly see it,
you can't see it, right?
Yeah, people just push it under the rug.
And this is also why we don't, treat people that have mental illnesses very positively.
Yep.
Oh, you're depressed, get over it. Well,
exactly.
You got a broken arm, it wouldn't be get over it. It would be like, hey, let's take care of you. But in terms of, even dramatic ADHD or anxiety or PTSD or depression or even just mild, I'm having a bad day, there's this lack of understanding that there's real physiology behind that and that you can do things. And, just like you have oral hygiene, brush and floss your teeth, you kind of need mental hygiene. You kind of need to be developing a meditation practice or, other, kinds of things to keep your brain health up, so to speak.
I like what you just hit there, Doc, but with the meditation. So we got people at home that get a little bit confused with how to meditate or what the best way is. There's a cool app out there called Headspace, which kind of really makes meditation really simple for people. Check that out on the iTunes store. What's your take on meditation, like Meditation 101? This is my first time doing it.
Yep.
How do I do it?
Okay, so meditation, what it's not is getting your mind to a blank state. Folks often think that, meditation, it's about being blank-minded, about having no thoughts. That's not the goal, nor is it the practice. It is true that as you learn to do it and become better at meditating, your mind does become a little more spacious. But the practice of meditation is actually attention training. And by that I mean you pick some object, something static like the sensation on your upper lip as your breath passes it, or your belly rising and falling with your breath, or a spot of color on the wall, or the sound of, a car passing by out the window. Whatever it is, you pick some stimulus and you hold your attention on it. So I would say as a definition that attention is paying attention. I would say as a definition, mindfulness is paying attention in a specific way to the present moment on purpose. And operationally, the act of meditation or mindfulness is simply picking something to focus on and focusing on it, holding it in your attention. And then when you notice that you've gotten distracted, you have a mind, so it starts to fantasize or dream or wish or want. Whenever you notice you've drifted away from the focus, from the meditation object, you put down the distraction and bring your attention back to that object. And that is simply the rep of meditation is, I've gotten distracted, back to the object, back to watching my breath or back to watching, a spot of color or thinking of a sound or something. It doesn't really matter what the object is per se. And if you think about sort of classic forms of meditation, historical forms, then you can kind of correlate or, translate modern versus ancient techniques, and they're all just attention training. So focusing on the present time, sort of like a fluid, watching the breath rise and fall. That's just present time awareness, or vipassana classically, also known as insight meditation. Samatha, which is single point awareness, would pick a very narrow focus. And where vipassana is helping you train up the flexibility of your attention, samatha, or single point awareness, helping you train the stability, the precision, the focus aspect of your attention. Another classic technique called metta is loving kindness, and that's about picking a feeling tone, an emotional state that you're focusing on. But in all these cases, you're really just sort of training your stability, flexibility, concentration of your attending resources and getting more control over what is normally, for many people, more of a reactive process internally, and making yourself, the phrase I use is more intention, less momentum internally. But it's not getting your mind to a blank state. That comes a little bit as you learn to do it. But the practice is attending, noticing when you've gotten distracted, and then re-attending. And it's not like you have to sit in, an ashram for 6 months at a time to get the benefits here. 20 minutes a day is probably sufficient to reap the vast majority of benefits that are showing up in the literature for meditation. And those benefits start to show up within a few weeks. So, 15, 20 minutes a morning, in a few weeks, you're going to have a different brain.
And when you do it, Doc, are you just sitting there and breathing and just focusing on the breath, or?
Yeah, when I do it, and the way that I often teach, and if folks go to the Alternatives Brain Institute website, I have a cheat sheet on there with this instruction. But what I do is I set a timer for 20 minutes. It plays 3 bells at the beginning and the end, and 1 bell at 5 minutes. And I sit upright with my back unsupported, so I'm nice and balanced. I'm not going to fall asleep or anything. And then I watch the very narrow sensation of breath crossing my upper lip. I don't follow the sensation into the body. I simply feel breath tickling the little hairs in the upper lip, and watch that very narrow, very precise point. And I do that for about 5 minutes. And then the single bell rings. When that bell rings, I switch my attention to a more open focus of Vipassana, where I'm watching the rise and fall of the belly. And what I often do for the belly or for Vipassana is I'll sort of breathe in, breathe out, and then count that cycle, 1. And then, again, holding my attention on the sensation of breathing, I breathe in, I breathe out, 2. And I continue that as long as I haven't gotten distracted. But the moment I notice I'm dreaming, wishing, planning, fantasizing, getting hungry, whatever it is, I go, oops, and I put down the distraction, go back to the breath, and I start my count over again. And it's rare that I can get to 10 by the end of 20 minutes of meditation. So it's work, it's effortful control of the attention. That's really what I'm trying to accomplish, not getting to any particular state.
That makes a lot of sense. Barris, do you have any questions you wanted to follow up with?
Yeah, I wanted to redirect to one specific question. And I don't know if you've done any studies with this, but there might be a possibility, being that you are in California, correct?
Yes.
So I wanted to get a quick take, and I know there's some stigma and political views behind the use of cannabis, but have you had the chance to measure that maybe what's happening at the time cannabis is being used with?
It's funny, we're actually about to launch a big research study here at the Alternatives Brain Institute looking at cannabis users. One of the really strange things we've discovered in neurofeedback is that just a few sessions of neurofeedback abolishes the tolerance to cannabis. It's just gone. Like you're a teenager again with your first joint. And a lot of people in California, Southern California especially, are hardcore recreational users. And I tell them, hey, be really careful. Now we're training your brain. You're gonna have no tolerance. I don't believe you. I'm an expert. Leave me alone. And they come back the next day. Oh man, you weren't kidding. So there's something about making the brain more flexible, more plastic, that really rolls back all the tolerance you've acquired. But yes, I have looked a little bit at brain activity. When you smoke weed, your brain goes into alpha. And alpha is used for lots of things in the brain. There's at least 4 or 5 different types of alpha functionally. But we think of it in general as an idling rhythm. The car's in the driveway, it's running great, but not going anywhere. If you're trying to be in neutral, that's wonderful, But if you're trying to drive down the highway, not so good. And so with your eyes closed, the brain also produces lots of alpha, especially in the visual cortex, because there's no input. It's idling cortex. When you open your eyes, that alpha should get suppressed and be replaced with beta as you're processing stuff coming in through the eyes. If you stay in alpha mode when you open your eyes, we call that inattentive ADHD. But it looks identical to me subjectively for folks that are long-term chronic stoners. That like half a beat slow, a little checked out, slowed attention, hard to shift into gear. The brain looks the same. I can't really tell the difference between an inattentive, ADHD person and a long-term chronic stoner without asking them, how long have you been like this? Because if they've been like this since birth, then they're inattentive ADHD. And if they've been like this for the past 3 years, they've been smoking pot, then it's an acquired issue from cannabis. So, I do see some negatives in that way, that producing an executive function sort of deficit, almost an acquired ADHD a little bit in many people. But I also think there's there's good reasons people use it as well. I don't vilify the substance. per se, and I certainly don't vilify people's use of substances. People have used substances to alter their brains since we have had brains.
Right. Yeah.
It's
part of being human.
Yeah, it's about how you get control. I haven't mentioned this on the podcast yet, but we have another half of alternatives that does non-12-step outpatient work, and we actually teach people to drink. So if you've been somebody who's been abstaining from alcohol because you don't think you can control your behavior, we actually will help you reintroduce it in a structured fashion and get control of behavior. We haven't done that in California for cannabis because it's not legal recreationally for cannabis. But, there's some things you can't abstain from that are hard sometimes to have a relationship with. Food is one. You can't abstain from food. I would never say, oh, you're an addict, because you're eating food. No. You got a problem with your relationship with a substance. It can be food, it can be sex, it can be cannabis, it can be alcohol, it can be anything. Your use of the substance or of whatever it is, as my business partner here, Dr. Kern, says, your magic elixir, it doesn't really matter what the elixir is that you're using to alter yourself. If you're using it to avoid handling your reality, that's a problem. If you're using it to enjoy yourself at the end of the day, I think that's a human thing to do to some extent. And I think that we need to not, brand you as an addict just because you have a substance, routine, as long as the relationship with that substance is not compromised. And, cannabis, yes, it has some drawbacks, but it's as substances that humans use go, not all that dramatic. I mean, your judgment is much less impaired on cannabis than alcohol, let's say. No one's ever died of liver failure from cannabis. In fact, I don't think anyone's ever died from smoking cannabis, period.
Yeah, exactly.
And how many people have died last week from smoking alcohol? It's a fairly dramatic difference. Yes, I do think there's things that can be done, but I wouldn't worry too much about the healthy, moderate, recreational, or medical use of these things. I don't think they're necessarily anti-brain health. It's when you get out of control, either in the amounts, so they're changing your brain dramatically, or you get out of control in why you're using them.
Why?
To escape pain, boredom, that's a problem.
That's a big issue, is the why. I guess one more follow-up question. Would it also be due to because there's so many different breeds of it, and I know in today's age, people like stoners, they just enjoy that kind of idle feeling, whereas some people want more pain or more help with maybe some of the things like we mentioned before, like the anxiety and ADHD. Maybe that's, for some people, that might just be a small term solution. Could it also be some of these that they breed in a lot higher THC content than they did before in the past in ratio to the CBD?
Yeah, and this is a big deal. I was having my technician, my lead tech here, go through the literature on cannabis to help us design our new study, and a lot of the research was done in the 70s, and it shows, the brain activity effects of smoking pot last about 40 minutes. And we were looking at this data, and it just didn't make sense based on what we know about pot. And people's subjective experience, and we dug a little bit deeper, and most of these studies in the 70s used cannabis with about 2% THC. I don't know if you're aware, but in the average dispensary now,
15 or 20, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the average is like 15, but there's plenty of high-end 20, 21, 22% strains. So we're at the point now where the average recreational user can use pot that is 10 times as much THC as like our parents did, let's say, in the 70s. And, it's much more prevalent because if you were a pothead in the 70s, you were still kind of a fringy person. And nowadays you might be a grandma who has glaucoma.
Right.
It's not necessarily has the same relationship with society as it did, 40 years ago. So, yes, major differences. We don't really fully understand, I think, what's happening with all of these new strains and the effects in the brain. So Alternatives is definitely going to do some work this spring on trying to quantify what those changes are in the brain. And we're going to do full head EEGs while people are smoking weed to see what happens and see how we can affect their tolerance and try to have them do several weeks of neurofeedback to look at how their sense of being altered changes because, for the most part, it's a pretty innocuous drug. It does seem to have some drawbacks the way people use it, specifically smoking. Smoking's not the healthiest thing in the world, no matter what you're smoking.
Exactly.
It does look like
burning something, right?
Yeah, the carbon and coal and tar, whatever else. I mean, not coal, but tar and other resins. Now, there's something in cannabis that appears to be anti-carcinogenic, even when you smoke it. So it both causes the lung changes you get from burning things and reduces the risk of them turning into cancerous cells. So it's a bit of a hedge. So it's not as bad as smoking nicotine or anything else, but it's still not great.
Yeah.
And so, I was talking to a dispensary here, and they were like, "Yeah, man, some users can only go after the absolute highest end, most strong strain because they've been using for medical reasons for so long that they have incredibly high tolerance."
Tolerance, right?
And from my perspective as a substance abuse professional, getting someone to reset their tolerance is key in helping them learn to become moderate in use.
Yeah, that seems.
And so we're trying to validate this, new technique for dropping tolerance for cannabis in the future.
Yeah, that'd be awesome because then you can have someone, like you said too, smoking isn't good. Like if they can somehow maybe vaporize it and then if they went back to, I guess the quote would be being a rookie again or lower their tolerance, and then now
maybe
you can
smoke 10% as much and only get 1/10 of the smoke inhaled or whatever.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Well, excellent, Doc. I really appreciate the interview here. There's some great information for all of our listeners. Can you give us some websites of where our listeners can go to get more about you? I think you also have a free trial on the True Brain products. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So True Brain, trubrain.com. We have 2 products. The original, which is capsule. It's a regimen. You take it twice a day, and it's sold on a subscription because it works better and better the longer you do it. And then we have drinks, little 1-ounce liquid drinks for folks that didn't want to swallow pills. The other companies I'm involved with, Alternatives Behavioral Health. The best place for your listeners to check that out is probably alternativesbraininstitute.com. And you can sort of get more information about neurofeedback and EEGs there, about what I do. And then if folks want to check me out on social media, ask questions, give me a hard time, whatever you feel like. Andrew Hill, PhD at Twitter is my Twitter handle, Andrew Hill, PhD. So you can find me on Twitter. It's probably the easiest one to remember. And I'm happy to answer questions about brain health, neurofeedback, meditation. I'm sort of, I guess I'm the science guy who's a brain hacker in the space now. Most of the other brain hackers or biohackers out there are really interesting guys who've done a lot of work on themselves, but I think I'm kind of coming at it from the other perspective of doing the science validation, and I'm always happy to hear what people's own biohacking or brain fitness strategies and successes are.
Dr. Hill, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And everyone listening, feel free and go to beyondwellnessradio.com/updates to get this episode as soon as it airs. Thanks, Doc.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Nice talking to you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Take care.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.